Perfect timing. Hi, Dr. Peterson. My name is Gary, and I'm a clinical and counseling master's student right now. And so one of the key ideas that's been surfacing time and time again in your lectures is the idea that phenomenology is structured and flows mythologically. And the way that plays out is, I'm supposing affectively, you just pay attention to what comes up kind of naturally, and you can locate the chaotic elements in your experience and prod at them with whatever degree of necessity you think. So trying to situate this within the clinical context, we can conceptualize psychotherapy as a kind of guided journey, just as you touched on in this lecture, where it's more of a meta journey in a sense, a meta-heroic journey. I don't know how you want to think about it. But just for those of us who are interested in kind of grounding and implementing these ideas within psychotherapeutic practice, what should we watch out for in the process itself? What comes up? What should we be afraid of or fearful of or cautious about, or what should we tend towards? That's my question.
Well, I think one of the people who I've read that's had the biggest impact on me as a clinician was Carl Rogers. And the reason for that is that Carl Rogers put tremendous emphasis on listening. Like, it's almost impossible to overestimate how useful it is to listen to your clients. Like, you need a meta scheme in some sense. And the meta scheme, I think, is laid out in the Sermon on the Mount. It's something like, orient yourself and your client towards the good. The client has to conceptualize what that might be. You can serve as a guide, but it has to come from that person. Because one of the things that you want to find out from your client is, okay, what's wrong? They have to tell you. And what would not having something wrong look like? Like, what is it, if you could have what you wanted, and that would be good, what would that look like? Okay, so that establishes your star, right? It's like Geppetto establishing the relationship with the star at the beginning of Pinocchio. Here's what we're aiming at. Okay, so now you've got that schema. Here's what we're aiming at. Now you might think, well, now that what happens to the client is they meet their dragons along the way. And their dragons would be, well, now you know what you want, and there are things in your way. And some of those things many of those things are going to be intensely practical. But they're practical / psychological. So maybe someone has a job and they would like to move forward in their job, but they're terrified of speaking in public. Well, is that a psychological problem or a practical problem? It's both. It's also a real problem. In many positions, unless you can speak fluently, publicly, you're going to hit a ceiling and you're not going to go anywhere. And so for the person to move towards that goal, then they have to confront the obstacles that manifest themselves within that framework. And part of your job as a clinician is to identify the obstacles and to discriminate them from things they don't have to worry about, right? Part of it is, you can't just run around and try to combat all the chaos in the world. Some of it is your chaos and a bunch of it isn't. And the chaos that's yours is the chaos that emerges as you move towards a necessary goal. And so partly what you're doing by listening to your client is to help them cut their dragons down to size. Because what'll happen if you start to talk to somebody about public speaking and you really talk to them is that you decompose the problem into a set of maybe 20 sub-problems. Like, well, do you know exactly how to give a speech? Like, what's your theory of public speaking? Do you know how to look at people when you're talking? Do you know how to speak loudly enough so that people can hear you? Do you have a philosophy of public speaking? All those things are necessary in order to do it properly. You need to decompose that with the client, and then to make those problems, you have to decompose them to the point where they can be met by a practical solution. And then you have to guide the person through the implementation of the practical solution. And mostly you do that by listening. It's like what you need to be is the person who helps the person that you're working with orient themselves towards a better future. That's the compact. You and I are in this space at this time to make things better. First of all, we have to decide what better would look like. And second, we need a strategy. And third, we need to, once we have that, we're going to see the obstacles. And some of those are going to be psychological and some of them are going to be practical. And we're going to engage in joint problem solving of whatever sort is necessary in order to minimize the impact of those problems or to gain from the problems. And dream analysis can be extremely useful for that, by the way. It's even more useful for helping the person identify what the goal is, because that's often difficult for people. It's like, well, I know that something's wrong, but I don't know what I want. Sometimes people get so stuck there that they just can't get out of it. So, and then what would you watch out for?
Phenomenologically, the way it shows up, the way it's experienced.
Well, I would say as a clinician, one of the things that you should watch out for is resentment. So there's a couple of rules of thumb that I think are useful. Don't do anything for your clients that they can do for themselves. And don't do them any favors. Now, I think you can step beyond the confines of your role carefully, now and then, to show that there's a more human connection than the merely contractual. I think that's very useful. But their problems are not your problems. You do not have any right to their problems. And so you have to maintain that detachment, because otherwise you can steal their destiny. You don't want to be the person that solves their problems, because you steal their destiny when you do that. You want to be someone with whom they can figure things out for themselves. And so there can be hubris in being a clinician, because you can be the problem solver, and that elevates you to a position. You elevate yourself to that position, you'll fall flat on your face. You'll hurt your clients, and things will kick back on you very, very hard. Because what the hell do you know, right? Nothing. Because that person is very complicated, and they need to sort themselves out. But you can be a facilitator for that. But that's all you should be. And so you have to watch that. You have to watch becoming overly entangled. So you have to maintain your detachment in the best sense. And you have to not overstep your... It's easy to become hubristic when the person is looking to you for the answers. It's like you don't have the answers, although you might be able to help the person find their way. That's what you do with everyone you love too, right? I mean, you don't provide them with the answers, because then they become little clones of you. And unhappy, bitter, resentful, and angry little clones of you, because you've usurped their destiny. And so the same thing applies within familial arrangements or friendships, all of that. So